What if the people you trusted most, the ones who raised you, loved you, celebrated every milestone, suddenly became the center of a nightmare that no one could have predicted? Imagine waking up one morning to discover that your family's world had been shattered, not by chance, not by tragedy, but by a deliberate, horrifying act. This is the story of Rob Reiner and Michelle Reiner, a couple whose lives were cut short in a way so shocking, so brutal, that it has left fans, Hollywood insiders, and everyday people speechless. And the truth behind their deaths, revealed in the official autopsy report, has only deepened the horror. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. It was a scene that seemed to belong in the plot of a suspense thriller, not in the quiet neighborhoods of Brentwood. On a crisp December night, Rob and Michelle attended a festive holiday gathering hosted by none other than Conan O'Brien. Laughter, sparkling lights, clinking glasses, the buzz of celebrity chatter, everything seemed normal. Yet beneath the surface, tensions simmered. Those who observed them that evening would later speak of an explosive argument, a moment of intense confrontation between the Reiners and their son, Nick. The next morning, those tensions would manifest in the most devastating way imaginable. Their daughter, Romy, found the lifeless bodies of her parents in their home. Both had been stabbed multiple times. Their throats had been slit. Rob, 78 years old, and Michelle, 70, were gone. In the official language of the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner, the cause of death was recorded as multiple sharp force injuries, and the deaths were ruled a homicide. But behind the sterile words of the report lay a story filled with heartbreak, betrayal, and a darkness that no one wanted to confront. It is difficult to overstate the shock this caused, not only to those close to the family, but to the public at large. Rob Reiner, the iconic director and actor whose films shaped generations, was seen as larger than life, a fixture in Hollywood with a career spanning decades. Michelle Reiner, a mother and matriarch, was known for her warmth, her presence at charitable events, and her unassuming elegance. Together, they represented stability, love, and a legacy of family values. And yet, in the early hours of that Sunday morning, everything changed. Consider for a moment the contrast: a holiday party, laughter in the air, glasses raised in toast, then mere hours later, a house filled with silence and grief. It is the kind of stark juxtaposition that shocks the mind, that forces one to question how quickly life can turn from joy to tragedy. How does a family go from celebration to catastrophe in the span of a few hours? What hidden tensions can build quietly over decades and suddenly erupt with irreversible consequences? In the days following their deaths, fans flooded social media with disbelief and sorrow. Tributes poured in, mourning the loss of two figures who seemed untouchable by tragedy. Headlines screamed for attention. Hollywood in shock. Tragedy strikes beloved couple. Mystery surrounds brutal homicide. And amidst the swirling speculation, the truth began to emerge, piece by piece, from the statements of friends, witnesses, and most crucially, the official autopsy report. The report itself is clinical, detached, yet every detail carries weight. Multiple stab wounds, defensive injuries, signs of a struggle. The kind of evidence that forces one to confront the reality of violence within a family. And then there is the timing. Authorities believe that the deaths occurred in the early hours of Sunday morning, mere hours after that explosive argument at the party. The juxtaposition is almost unbearable. A family in the spotlight, a moment of conflict, and then a violent resolution that leaves a void no one can fill. But there is more to the story than the crime scene and the medical examiner's findings. Behind the cold facts are questions that tug at the heart and the mind. Why did this happen? Could anyone have predicted it? What were the underlying tensions that led to such a horrifying outcome? And perhaps most chilling of all, could this have been prevented? These are not just the questions of law enforcement or investigators. They are the questions of every person who watches, who cares, who feels the sting of empathy and horror. The scene itself, as described by Romy, is almost unbearable to imagine. Walking into the home of your parents, expecting warmth and comfort, and instead encountering a tableau of violence. The sensory details, the smell of blood, the eerie silence, the stillness of bodies that were once vibrant with life. linger in the imagination. It is a moment that crystallizes grief in its rawest form, forcing the observer to grapple with mortality, love, and the fragility of human life. And yet, even amidst the horror, there is a story to be told. A story not just of death, but of life. The lives of Rob and Michelle Reiner, their career achievements, their family history, and the complicated, sometimes turbulent relationships that define every household. The autopsy report, while shocking, is only a piece of the puzzle. To understand what truly happened, we must look deeper into the family dynamics, the events leading up to that fateful night, and the moments of tension that no one saw coming. This story matters because it is more than a celebrity tragedy. It is a human story, one that resonates with anyone who has experienced conflict, heartbreak, or the fragility of family bonds. It is a story that forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, about the consequences of unresolved anger, and about the line between love and violence. And it is a story that will continue to unfold as investigators, experts, and insiders piece together the fragments of a life and lives gone too soon. As we delve into the details, from the explosive fight at Conan O'Brien's party to the moments leading up to the discovery of the bodies, and ultimately into the findings of the autopsy report, you will witness a story of suspense, emotion, and tragedy. You will be confronted with facts that are hard to digest, with revelations that will challenge your assumptions, and with questions that have no easy answers. And yet, even as we begin this journey, there is a tension that cannot be ignored. The autopsy has provided answers, but only in part. The reasons, the motivations, the human emotions behind the act remain partially shrouded. And it is in that space, the space between fact and understanding, between evidence and empathy, that the true weight of this story lies. So, as we start to unravel the layers of this shocking event, ask yourself, how well do you really know the people closest to you? Can a moment of anger, a burst of conflict, truly change the course of lives forever? And most importantly, what comes next when the truth is finally revealed? The answers, as we will discover, are far more unsettling than most people are prepared to hear. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What is it about certain families that makes the world stop and pay attention? Some families achieve fame and fortune, some cultivate legacy, and some hide storms behind polished smiles. The Reiners were all of these things. Rob Reiner, Michelle Reiner, and their children were not just another Hollywood household. They were a dynasty, a family whose name carried weight, respect, and admiration. And yet, beneath the public facade of glamour and success, the Reiner family, like many others, had layers of tension, conflict, and secrets that would one day collide in the most tragic way imaginable. Rob Reiner's career is the stuff of legend. From his breakout role on All in the Family as Michael "Meathead" Stivic to directing iconic films such as The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, and A Few Good Men, Reiner's name has become synonymous with Hollywood excellence. He wasn't just a talented actor and director. He was a cultural touchstone. Millions grew up with his movies, laughed at his performances, and admired the way he shaped stories that captured both humor and humanity. Behind the camera, he was meticulous, passionate, and sometimes demanding, but always driven by a desire to create something lasting, something meaningful. Michelle Reiner, though less publicly visible, was equally vital to the family's story. Known among friends and colleagues as compassionate, thoughtful, and fiercely protective of her children, Michelle's presence anchored the family. She was not merely a celebrity spouse. She was a partner in every sense, involved in philanthropy, social causes, and the day-to-day management of a household that balanced fame, work, and private life. Her warmth was often noted by those who knew the family personally, a gentle counterbalance to the high-energy, sometimes chaotic world of Hollywood. Together, Rob and Michelle created an environment of apparent stability. Friends described their home as welcoming, full of laughter, conversation, and intellectual stimulation. Holiday parties were a staple, a time when the family could gather with friends and colleagues, enjoy traditions, and showcase the closeness that outsiders envied. Yet, even in such a seemingly idyllic environment, cracks can form. Differences of opinion, generational clashes, and the weight of expectation can slowly erode trust and understanding. And while few could see it from the outside, those cracks were present, waiting for a spark. Their son, Nick Reiner, now at the center of intense scrutiny, grew up in this world of visibility and expectation. Raised in a household of fame and achievement, he experienced both the privileges and pressures that come with being part of a well-known family. Friends and family described Nick as complex, intelligent, sensitive, yet sometimes volatile. The dynamics between him and his parents were nuanced. Moments of closeness punctuated by tension, conversations that seemed trivial to outsiders but carried immense weight within the family. Romy, the daughter who would later find her parents' bodies, was similarly shaped by this environment. Observers described her as thoughtful and resilient, someone capable of balancing the attention that comes with being part of a prominent family with her own identity. But even she could not have imagined the tragedy that would alter her life forever. To understand the Reiner family, it is essential to grasp the duality that defined them: public success and private complexity. To the world, they were accomplished, admired, and seemingly stable. To themselves, there were tensions, disagreements, and unresolved conflicts that, over time, created invisible fault lines. These fault lines, though often unnoticed by outsiders, are a hallmark of many family tragedies. And in the Reiner's case, they would become tragically pronounced. The family's social circles also played a significant role in shaping perceptions. Hollywood is an ecosystem where appearances matter, where relationships are both personal and performative. Friends and colleagues who attended gatherings, parties, and casual dinners often saw only fragments of the Reiners' lives. Laughter, conversation, and camaraderie were visible. But private arguments, suppressed grievances, and simmering resentments were often hidden, tucked behind smiles and polite exchanges. This duality would make it more difficult for anyone outside the immediate household to anticipate the events that would unfold on that fateful Sunday. Rob and Michelle's approach to parenting reflected both love and high expectations. They encouraged their children to pursue their passions, to strive for excellence, and to embrace opportunities that came with privilege. Yet, as with many families, these expectations carried their own pressures. Achievements were celebrated, but missteps were scrutinized. Individuality was supported, but family unity remained a priority. This balance, while seemingly harmonious, created an environment where misunderstandings could fester, where small disagreements could escalate into conflicts whose impact was greater than anyone anticipated. What made the Reiners remarkable was not just their success, but their ability to cultivate relationships both inside and outside the family. Friends, colleagues, and associates often spoke of the warmth that characterized the household, the laughter that filled the rooms, and the sense of connection that many longed to emulate. Yet this same closeness, the trust and intimacy that defined the family internally, also made the eventual rupture all the more shocking. For when those closest to you become the source of trauma, the impact is both emotional and existential. The question that lingers now, as we look back at the Reiner's life before tragedy, is deceptively simple. How does a family so seemingly strong and successful descend into violence and heartbreak? How do tensions that may appear trivial to outsiders evolve into irreversible acts? The answer lies in the interplay of personality, circumstance, and history, a combination that can, under certain pressures, produce outcomes that defy comprehension. As we trace the Reiners' story, from their family legacy to the events of that fateful weekend, patterns emerge. Arguments and disagreements, though common in any household, gain new significance when they intersect with personality traits, emotional vulnerabilities, and situational stressors. In the Reiners' case, the explosive confrontation with their son, Nick, was not an isolated incident. It was the culmination of years of unspoken conflict, friction, and unresolved issues. Friends who knew the family will often recall moments of intensity masked by humor or civility. Rob, passionate and sometimes stubborn, could engage in debate that escalated quickly. Michelle, caring yet assertive, could challenge family members in ways that exposed underlying tensions. Nick, a figure of curiosity and concern, often navigated these dynamics with both admiration and frustration, a mix that would ultimately define his relationship with his parents. These interactions, when viewed through the lens of hindsight, foreshadowed the tragic events that would soon unfold. And yet, even in this complex web of relationships, there were moments of profound love, care, and connection. The Reiners celebrated milestones together, supported each other through challenges, and maintained a public image of family unity. This juxtaposition, love coexisting with tension, creates a narrative that is as compelling as it is tragic. It is within this duality that we begin to understand how the Reiners' world, which appeared polished and secure to outsiders, could unravel with devastating speed. As the story unfolds, we will see how a single argument, a seemingly ordinary conflict at a holiday gathering, became the catalyst for a series of events that no one could have anticipated. Understanding the family's legacy, the personalities involved, and the private tensions that simmered beneath the surface is essential to comprehending the shocking tragedy that followed. The Reiner story is not unique in its public-facing success or in its private challenges, but it is extraordinary in the way that tragedy struck at the heart of a family whose life seemed so enviable. And as we move forward into the events of that weekend, it becomes painfully clear that no amount of fame, no measure of success, could shield them from the forces, both personal and emotional, that would ultimately shape their fate. The stage was set, the characters defined, and the undercurrents of tension established. All that remained was the fateful confrontation, the pivotal moments that would change the Reiner family forever. And when those moments arrived, they would leave a mark not just on the family, but on everyone who would come to hear the story. But what happened next would shock the world, and it all began with one night at a party that seemed perfectly ordinary. Saturday night in Hollywood has a rhythm all its own. The city buzzes with anticipation, glamour, and the faint hum of ambition. Limos glide down palm-lined streets, paparazzi hover at discreet distances, and the glow of city lights paints everything in a surreal, almost cinematic way. It was on such a night that Rob and Michelle Reiner stepped into what, on the surface, seemed like a typical festive gathering, Conan O'Brien's annual holiday party. But as the evening would unfold, what appeared to be just another celebration became a turning point. A night whose events would ripple through the Reiner family's lives and ultimately culminate in tragedy. From the moment they arrived, Rob and Michelle were the picture of holiday cheer. Rob, with his familiar charm and easy smile, greeted friends and colleagues warmly, engaging in animated conversation about recent projects, cultural moments, and shared memories. Michelle, radiant and gracious, navigated the crowd with practiced elegance, ensuring that old friends felt welcomed and new acquaintances found common ground. Laughter echoed through the room. The atmosphere was buoyant, festive, seemingly insulated from the tensions lurking beneath the surface. Yet for those closest to the family, the night held subtle signs that all was not entirely calm. A lifelong friend of the Reiners would later recount that Rob and Michelle engaged in brief, tense exchanges with their son, Nick, moments that seemed small at the time but would later take on enormous significance. Nick, now in his early 30s, had been part of the gathering for only a short period before a conversation between father and son escalated in volume and intensity. Witnesses described a sharpness in the air, a sudden shift in energy, the kind that makes casual observers glance over and notice an undercurrent of unease. The argument itself, though brief in duration, was explosive in impact. Sources indicate that it revolved around a mix of personal grievances, lifestyle differences, and long-standing frustrations. Words were exchanged that cut deep, echoing patterns of unresolved tension that had existed for years. Friends recall the room briefly falling silent, the laughter halting as attention subtly shifted to the trio at the corner. But then, just as quickly, the energy resumed. Conversations restarted, music played, and the party continued. To outsiders, it appeared as though the argument had been nothing more than a minor familial spat. To the Reiners, however, the confrontation carried weight far beyond what anyone else could perceive. It is in these seemingly ordinary moments that tragedy often finds its beginnings. A sharp word, a misunderstood comment, a flash of anger, all can accumulate silently over time, creating pressure points that eventually give way under the right, or wrong, circumstances. For the Reiners, the fight at Conan's party was more than a fleeting argument. It was a crystallization of long-simmering emotions, a trigger for forces that had been building behind closed doors. As the party wound down in the late hours of the evening, Rob and Michelle made their way home. Observers remember seeing them leave together, appearing composed, though perhaps burdened with the remnants of tension from the earlier confrontation. The drive home, while routine, would mark the final moments in which friends and colleagues saw the couple alive. In hindsight, every detail, no matter how trivial it seemed at the time, now carries the weight of foreshadowing. The quick exchange of words with a passerby, a pause at a traffic light, the subtle gestures of fatigue or frustration, all are fragments of a narrative that, until now, had been hidden in plain sight. Back at their Brentwood estate, the night air was cool and still, a stark contrast to the warmth and energy of the party. Inside, the house was quiet, almost too quiet, as if it were holding its breath. The Reiners settled in for what should have been a peaceful night, but the echoes of the earlier confrontation lingered. While friends and colleagues would awaken the next morning to headlines of shocking discovery, for Rob, Michelle, and Nick, the hours ahead were filled with moments that seemed mundane yet were charged with the potential for disaster. Witnesses later described the argument at Conan's as out of character for Rob and Michelle, a statement that hints at the extraordinary nature of what occurred. These were not habitual displays of conflict. These were rare flashes of intensity in a family that, for all its complexity, was known for civility, mutual respect, and love. And yet, on that particular night, something fundamental shifted. The Reiners' private world collided with emotions they may have believed contained, sparking a chain of events whose consequences would become impossible to reverse. As the hours ticked past midnight, tension and unresolved anger lingered invisibly. The home, which moments before had been a place of warmth and safety, began to take on a different atmosphere. Every step, every word exchanged, carried the potential to tip the balance toward confrontation. Observers outside the family could not have known this. The night appeared calm from every angle. Yet in the quiet corners of the Reiner home, human emotions, volatile, complex, unpredictable, were moving toward an inevitable and catastrophic climax. In reflecting on that evening, one cannot ignore the powerful role of context. Social events like Conan O'Brien's party are designed to highlight connections, to foster laughter and shared experiences. But for those already navigating fraught relationships, such gatherings can inadvertently exacerbate tensions. The Reiners, like many families under the public eye, had multiple layers of expectation, pressure, and scrutiny. Every interaction, no matter how trivial, was charged with potential meaning, potential conflict, and potential misunderstanding. By the time the party ended, the seeds of tragedy had been sown. What seemed like a minor disagreement had left its mark, creating a psychological residue that would carry into the early hours of the following morning. No one could have predicted how swiftly, how violently, that residue would manifest. And yet, for those who knew the Reiners best, the intensity of the argument served as a warning, a glimpse into the fragile equilibrium of a family whose life of privilege and success could not shield them from human fallibility. When friends later recounted the party to authorities and the press, a striking pattern emerged. Almost everyone remembered the laughter, the conversations, the festive atmosphere. But many also remembered the sudden change in energy, the tense exchange between father, mother, and son. It is a reminder that tragedy often begins quietly, invisibly, in ordinary moments that seem insignificant until their consequences become undeniable. As Rob and Michelle returned home that night, the stage was set. Unseen forces, emotions, grievances, histories were converging. And while they may have believed the night was over, that the argument had ended, the truth was far more sinister. In the hours ahead, the Reiner family's world would be irrevocably transformed, leaving behind a scene that would shock everyone who encountered it. The events of Saturday night, when examined closely, provide crucial context for the tragedy that followed. They reveal not only the friction between family members, but also the fragile nature of human relationships. Even in families that appear ideal, stable, or loving. And as we move forward into the discovery of the bodies the next morning, it becomes clear that the seemingly ordinary details of a holiday party were anything but ordinary. They were the prelude to a nightmare. But what happened in those quiet hours after the party, inside the Reiner estate, would surpass all imagination, and no one, not even the closest friends, could have foreseen the horror that awaited. Imagine walking into a house that has always been a sanctuary, a place of warmth, laughter, and the comforting rhythm of family life. Now imagine that same house transformed in an instant into a scene of unimaginable horror. For Romy Reiner, this was not a thought experiment, it was reality. On that fateful Sunday morning, she discovered the lifeless bodies of her parents, Rob and Michelle Reiner, in what can only be described as a brutal tableau of violence. What unfolded that morning would mark the beginning of a public and private reckoning, a story that would shock the world and haunt everyone connected to it. The hours leading up to Romy's discovery were, on the surface, uneventful. Friends had last seen Rob and Michelle leaving Conan O'Brien's holiday party, appearing composed and in good spirits. But the explosive argument earlier in the evening had set the stage for what was about to come. Behind closed doors, tension simmered. Human emotions, volatile and unpredictable, were quietly building toward a climax that no one outside the Reiner household could have anticipated. Romy arrived at the Brentwood estate that morning with a sense of routine. She expected to find her parents awake, perhaps enjoying coffee, the home alive with familiar sounds and scents. Instead, she encountered silence. At first, it was the kind of silence that can be overlooked, dismissed as normal in a large, quiet house. But the air felt heavy, almost oppressive. Something felt wrong, a subtle cue that alarmed the instincts before the mind could process what was happening. As she moved through the rooms, the reality began to assert itself with devastating clarity. The sight of her parents, both gone, their bodies bearing the marks of a violent attack, was a shock so profound that it defies simple description. Rob, 78, and Michelle, 70, had suffered multiple sharp force injuries, and their throats had been slit. The scene, described by investigators as a homicide, was one that no daughter could ever prepare for, no matter how strong, no matter how resilient. The immediate moments are a blur in the retelling, both for Romy and for those who later reconstructed the events. Witness accounts describe her screaming, her body trembling, the disbelief evident in every movement. It is the kind of reaction that underscores the incomprehensible nature of violent loss. How a single act can dismantle an entire world in an instant. In those first minutes, the duality of grief and shock collided, creating an emotional landscape that is both raw and unmanageable. Law enforcement arrived soon after the discovery, their presence a stark contrast to the private devastation unfolding inside the home. Investigators meticulously documented the scene, noting every detail, every sign of struggle, every clue left behind. Forensic evidence confirmed what the initial visual impression suggested. Rob and Michelle had died from multiple sharp force injuries, a clinical description that belied the human tragedy it represented. Defensive wounds indicated a struggle, a desperate attempt to fend off the attack, underscoring the violent nature of the deaths. Yet for Romy, the procedural and methodical approach of the police offered little solace. The sterile terminology of reports and official statements could not capture the emotional and psychological impact of the moment. She was confronted with questions that have no easy answers. How could this happen? Why did this happen? Could anything have prevented it? These questions, unanswerable and relentless, are the emotional core of the tragedy, the human dimension that transforms a headline into a lifelong wound. Media outlets quickly picked up the story, and the world reacted with a mix of shock, curiosity, and empathy. Headlines screamed the facts, sometimes sensationalized, sometimes factual, but all underscored the same truth. A beloved Hollywood couple had been murdered in their own home, and the world was watching. Fans took to social media, struggling to reconcile the image of Rob Reiner, the celebrated director, with the horror that had unfolded. Tributes poured in, messages of love and disbelief circulated, and the collective mourning became a global phenomenon. Despite the public attention, the the personal and intimate grief remained Romy's alone. The process of navigating such a profound loss is uniquely isolating. Even surrounded by friends, family, and law enforcement, the experience of encountering the bodies of one's parents is singular, incomprehensible, and permanent. For Romy, every object, every room, every detail of the home became charged with memory and trauma, an inescapable reminder of the parents she would never see alive again. The discovery also marked the beginning of an investigation that would expose not just the immediate facts of the case, but the complex, hidden dynamics of the Reiner family. In the aftermath, questions about family relationships, past tensions, and the events leading up to the night became central to understanding the tragedy. Investigators, friends, and family alike began to piece together a timeline. The holiday party, the argument, the drive home, and the fateful hours that led to the deaths. Each detail, seemingly small at the time, now carried immense significance. Psychologists and experts in trauma emphasize the long-term impact of discovering a loved one's death in such a violent manner. The shock, combined with the visual and emotional intensity of the scene, can produce lasting psychological effects: anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress, and complex grief that is difficult to navigate. Romy's experience, while unique in its celebrity context, reflects the universal human capacity to be overwhelmed by loss and the challenge of finding meaning in events that appear senseless. Moreover, the circumstances of the deaths, occurring shortly after a heated argument with her brother Nick, added layers of complexity, guilt, and confusion. Romy's understanding of family, trust, and safety was irrevocably altered in an instant. The duality of love and violence, of family unity and betrayal, became an unavoidable reality. Every memory of the home, every recollection of shared moments, would now be filtered through the lens of trauma and loss. In the broader context, Romy's discovery catalyzed the public narrative. Journalists, investigators, and the audience at large began to construct a story from fragments: the party, the argument, the violent deaths, and the official autopsy report. Each piece provided insight, but also raised further questions. How had a momentary argument escalated to homicide? What role did Nick play, and what were the underlying tensions within the family? The story, though rooted in fact, became a complex web of speculation, emotion, and unfolding revelation. As the investigation progressed, forensic analysis confirmed the severity and brutality of the attack. Multiple stab wounds, signs of defensive actions, and evidence of a struggle painted a harrowing picture. The term homicide, clinical in its precision, was imbued with profound human meaning: a life ended by deliberate violence, leaving survivors grappling with loss, shock, and the incomprehensible reality of murder. The tragedy of Romy's discovery is compounded by the timing. The deaths occurred mere hours after a public altercation at a holiday gathering, highlighting the unpredictable and sometimes explosive nature of human relationships. What might have seemed like a fleeting argument now appears as a pivotal moment, a catalyst for the events that followed. Understanding this timeline is crucial to grasping the full scope of the tragedy and the interplay of personal dynamics, emotions, and decisions that led to the Reiner's deaths. For those witnessing the story from the outside, the human dimension can sometimes be overshadowed by sensational headlines or official statements. But for Romy, and for the family at large, the experience is intensely personal. It is a confrontation with mortality, with violence, and with the fragility of trust and love. Every step of the investigation, every revelation from the autopsy report, every public reaction becomes intertwined with grief, memory, and the search for understanding. The discovery of Rob and Michelle Reiner's bodies is, in many ways, the fulcrum of the entire narrative. It is the moment when private tragedy intersects with public attention, when the story shifts from rumor and tension to confirmed horror. It is also the moment when the next chapters, the investigation, the autopsy, the family dynamics, and the legal repercussions, begin to take shape. And yet, even as the facts emerge, one question remains central: how did it come to this? How did a family so admired, so publicly accomplished, arrive at a point where violence erupted within their own home? The answer lies not only in the events of that night, but in the history, personalities, and hidden tensions that had been building for years. The world would soon learn more, but for Romy, the initial shock, the visceral confrontation with death, and the knowledge that her parents were gone forever marked a turning point that could never be undone. And what authorities, experts, and the public would uncover in the hours and days following this discovery would reveal a depth of complexity, pain, and tragedy that no one could have predicted. But what came next, the official autopsy report and the revelations it contained, would leave fans speechless and challenge everything people thought they knew about the Reiners. When tragedy strikes, the autopsy report becomes more than a medical document. It is the key to understanding the final, irreversible moments of a life. In the case of Rob and Michelle Reiner, the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's report did not just provide answers. It confirmed the horror in precise, clinical detail, leaving fans, investigators, and even those close to the family reeling. The findings revealed a brutal reality that could not be ignored. Both deaths were ruled homicides, caused by multiple sharp force injuries. But the details, the nuances, and the implications of the report would shock even seasoned observers. The first page of the report reads like any official document: names, dates, times, but beneath the sterile headings lies a story of violence and finality. Rob, aged 78, and Michelle, aged 70, suffered repeated stab wounds, inflicted with a level of force and intent that suggested both deliberation and ferocity. The injuries were concentrated in critical areas: the neck, torso, and arms. Defensive wounds indicated that both individuals had attempted to protect themselves from the assault. Each wound, cataloged meticulously by forensic pathologists, is a testament to the struggle, to the desperation, and ultimately to the fatal outcome. It is impossible to overstate the impact of these findings on those who read them. For fans who grew up admiring Rob Reiner's films, or who knew Michelle from her presence at social events, the report transformed grief into horror. These were not random or accidental injuries. They were deliberate, sustained, and lethal. The term homicide is clinical, yes, but in this context, it carries the weight of betrayal, shock, and profound tragedy. What makes this report particularly chilling is not just the confirmation of death, but the details it provides about the nature of the struggle. Defensive wounds on the hands and arms suggest that both Rob and Michelle fought to survive, that they resisted the attack with every instinct available to them. This detail, while perhaps overlooked in casual discussion, humanizes the final moments of their lives. It shows courage in the face of terror, a final act of resistance against a fate they could not escape. In the hours following the discovery, law enforcement and forensic experts used the report to reconstruct the sequence of events. While exact timelines are difficult to determine with precision, it is believed that the attack occurred in the early hours of Sunday morning, mere hours after the explosive confrontation at Conan O'Brien's holiday party. This timing is crucial. It suggests that the argument between Rob, Michelle, and their son Nick may have acted as a catalyst, a trigger for a chain of events that ended in tragedy. The report does not speculate on motive, but the correlation between the argument and the subsequent deaths is undeniable. For those tasked with investigating the scene, the autopsy report served as both confirmation and guide. Every detail helped reconstruct what had occurred inside the Reiner home. The positioning of the bodies, the distribution of injuries, and the presence of defensive wounds all contributed to understanding the sequence of violence. Investigators also noted the absence of certain signs, no evidence of forced entry, for example, which raised questions about the perpetrator's relationship to the victims. This detail would become a critical piece in the unfolding investigation, pointing towards someone familiar with the household rather than an outside intruder. Experts reviewing the report emphasized the brutality of the attack. Multiple sharp force injuries, particularly to vital areas, indicate intent to kill. The repeated nature of the wounds suggests not only anger but also determination, a sustained effort to ensure the fatal outcome. The combination of defensive wounds and targeted injuries paints a harrowing picture. Rob and Michelle were aware of the threat, fought to defend themselves, and ultimately succumbed to a relentless, violent assault. Beyond the technical details, the report also carries emotional weight. It confirms what Romy had already witnessed firsthand: the death of her parents in the most violent and shocking manner imaginable. For the family, the findings are a source of anguish, a formal acknowledgement of a reality that is almost impossible to process. And for the public, the report transforms abstract grief into concrete horror, highlighting the stark contrast between the lives the Reiners led and the manner in which they ended. The autopsy report also sheds light on certain inconsistencies and rumors circulating in the immediate aftermath. Speculation about the cause of death, the timing of the attack, and the circumstances surrounding it could now be addressed with authority. Each detail, from the location of wounds to the presence of defensive marks, provides clarity and narrows the scope of inquiry. Yet even with this clarity, questions remain. Who delivered the fatal blows? What motivated such a violent act within a family? How could the dynamic of a celebrated household escalate to this point? Psychologists and forensic experts emphasize that autopsy reports, while clinical, can offer insights into the psychology of the perpetrator. In cases involving multiple stab wounds and targeted injuries, the nature of the assault often reflects rage, frustration, and a desire for control or punishment. While motive cannot be confirmed without further investigation, the physical evidence points to an attack rooted in strong, personal emotion rather than random violence. This distinction is critical as the narrative unfolds, and investigators seek to understand not just what happened, but why. Another aspect highlighted in the report is the precision of the injuries. While the attack was brutal, it was also directed, not indiscriminate. Certain areas were targeted, indicating awareness and intent. The combination of force, location, and repetition suggests a perpetrator who was both familiar with the victims and emotionally charged in the moment. For friends and family, this adds another layer of complexity. The tragedy is not just a random act, but one embedded in the intimate relationships of the household. The timing and method of death also provide insight into the sequence of events. The early morning hours suggest a scenario where the victims may have been caught off guard, exhausted from the previous night's social engagements. The quiet of the home, typically a sanctuary, was exploited by the perpetrator. Defensive wounds indicate that the attack was not instantaneous but involved a struggle, a desperate attempt by Rob and Michelle to survive. The report, in essence, captures the intensity, the desperation, and the finality of those moments in stark, unforgiving detail. While the report leaves some questions unanswered, it serves as a cornerstone for the investigation. Every forensic detail informs law enforcement's next steps: interviews, timelines, motive exploration, and evidence collection. The findings provide a foundation from which investigators can reconstruct the night's events and begin to understand the human interactions that led to such a catastrophic outcome. For the public, the autopsy report transforms speculation into tangible understanding. Fans of Rob Reiner and admirers of the family at large are confronted with the undeniable reality. The deaths were violent, intentional, and catastrophic. No amount of fame, influence, or accomplishment could shield the Reiners from the brutality of that morning. The contrast between their celebrated public lives and the horror of their deaths is almost unbearable, creating a narrative that is as compelling as it is tragic. And yet, even as the report provides answers, it also raises new questions. How did the events at Conan O'Brien's party escalate into such violence? What role did family dynamics, emotional history, and personal conflict play in the final outcome? The autopsy is both a window into the final moments of life and a mirror reflecting the unresolved complexities of human relationships, particularly within families under extraordinary stress. In short, the Lackme report confirms the worst fears of everyone who knew the Reiners. The violence was real, intentional, and devastating. Rob and Michelle's deaths were not the result of accident, misfortune, or random crime. They were a homicide, an intimate and incomprehensible act that leaves lingering questions for investigators, family, and the public alike. But even as the report revealed the severity and nature of the deaths, it could not explain the deeper motivations, the emotions, or the familial tensions that led to this moment. Those answers would begin to emerge as the investigation unfolded, revealing a web of complexity, conflict, and emotion that no one could have anticipated. What came next? The painstaking reconstruction of the timeline, the analysis of relationships, and the search for motive would bring us closer to understanding the tragedy. And yet, even with every piece of evidence, one question remains haunting. How does a family go from celebration to catastrophe in just a few hours? The Lakme report answered the what and the how, but the why would prove far more difficult and far more shocking to uncover. Understanding tragedy often requires retracing the steps that led to it. In the case of Rob and Michelle Reiner, every hour, every interaction, and every seemingly minor moment on that fateful weekend contributed to the ultimate horror. Reconstructing the timeline is not just an exercise in forensic investigation. It is a journey into the human mind, relationships, and the subtle forces that can turn ordinary life into catastrophe. The hours between Saturday night and Sunday morning are particularly critical, revealing a sequence of events that few could have anticipated but that, in hindsight, form a chilling narrative of inevitability. The day began like any other for the Reiners, though beneath the routine, tensions already simmered. Leading up to the holiday party hosted by Conan O'Brien, Rob and Michelle spent the day preparing, managing last-minute details for their own household responsibilities while balancing the expectations of Hollywood life. The couple had long been accustomed to the dual demands of public appearances and private obligations. Yet, for all the outward normalcy, subtle stressors were at play. Expectations around their son Nick's behavior, unresolved disagreements from prior days, and the omnipresent pressures of maintaining appearances in front of friends, colleagues, and cameras. By the evening, the family arrived at the party, projecting the cheerful facade expected of high-profile hosts and guests alike. Early moments at the event appeared ordinary. Laughing conversations, light-hearted banter, and the warmth of holiday cheer. But as observers later reported, tensions between the Reiners and Nick began to surface. The details of the argument remained partially obscured, but multiple witnesses recalled elevated voices, sharp words, and a noticeable shift in energy. Though brief, the confrontation was intense, a spark in a context of accumulated frustrations that had been silently building over years. After the party, the family returned to their Brentwood estate. The journey home may have seemed uneventful to outsiders, yet every interaction carried the weight of prior conflict. Investigators would later speculate that the drive provided both reflection and escalation, moments of silence, occasional exchanges of words, and the psychological tension of unspoken grievances. By the time they arrived at the estate, the emotional climate had shifted. What was once ordinary familial interaction had become charged with resentment, unresolved conflict, and emotional volatility. Once inside the home, the sequence of events accelerated toward catastrophe. According to the investigation, the attack occurred in the early hours of Sunday morning, though exact timing is difficult to pinpoint. Rob and Michelle were in familiar spaces, the kitchen, the living room, the corridors of their own home. Yet within these ordinary settings, extraordinary violence erupted. The autopsy report confirmed multiple sharp force injuries and defensive wounds, suggesting both surprise and struggle. The physical evidence points to a series of moments in which the victims attempted to fend off an assailant, indicating that the tragedy was not instantaneous, but rather a prolonged, horrifying encounter. Concurrently, the timeline reflects the reactions of those nearby. Romy, the daughter, arrived later that morning to discover the aftermath. Her account, corroborated by law enforcement, places her entrance into the home shortly after the fatal incident. The minutes following her discovery are critical. She alerted authorities, the police arrived, and investigators began the meticulous work of documenting the scene. Every step, from the initial observation of the bodies to the collection of evidence, forms part of the chain of events that allows the reconstruction of the night. Importantly, the timeline also captures the proximity of events to the earlier party. The argument at Conan O'Brien's gathering, occurring just hours before the attack, is now seen as a critical point of escalation. While it is impossible to assert causation with absolute certainty, the correlation is striking. A heated familial dispute, followed by a return home, and then a violent culmination within a matter of hours. This sequence underscores how quickly tension can evolve into crisis, particularly within complex familial relationships where emotional history amplifies immediate conflicts. Investigators also examined ancillary details that help complete the timeline. Security footage from surrounding streets, phone records, and witness statements all contribute to a granular understanding of the sequence. These pieces, when assembled, reveal a night that progressed from normalcy to tension to violence with alarming speed. Every pause, every glance, every moment of silence in the home becomes significant when viewed through the lens of reconstruction. The psychological dimension is equally important. Humans are influenced not only by immediate events, but also by accumulated stress, personal grievances, and emotional triggers. In this timeline, the combination of a public argument, private expectations, and the pressures of family dynamics created a psychological environment primed for volatility. Understanding the sequence of moments, the escalation from conversation to conflict to violence, is essential to comprehending why tragedy struck when it did and why it struck so violently. Moreover, the timeline emphasizes the tragedy of lost opportunity. Each moment before the attack represented a chance for intervention, for dialogue, or for de-escalation. But the rapid progression of events, coupled with the intensity of emotional conflict, closed those opportunities almost as quickly as they appeared. The inevitability that emerges from the timeline is terrifying. Ordinary hours transformed into extraordinary devastation in the span of mere moments. Following the attack, the immediate hours involved both crisis response and initial investigation. Romy's discovery, the arrival of law enforcement, and the preliminary documentation of the scene mark the beginning of public awareness. At this point, timelines begin to bifurcate. The private experience of grief, shock, and trauma for the family, and the public process of investigation, reporting, and media coverage. Both strands are inseparably linked, yet each reveals different dimensions of the tragedy. The timeline also clarifies discrepancies in early reports. Some media outlets initially suggested alternative scenarios: random intruder, robbery, accidental misfortune. But the sequence of events, combined with forensic evidence, confirms that the deaths were the result of intentional, directed violence. The precise reconstruction allows investigators to focus on key questions: motive, opportunity, and relational dynamics. Without the timeline, these questions remain abstract. With it, they gain concrete structure and direction. In analyzing the hours between the party and the discovery of the bodies, one sees a clear arc of human behavior: social engagement, emotional escalation, private confrontation, and ultimately, irreversible violence. Each stage contributes to the narrative, illustrating how quickly circumstances can spiral out of control when complex emotions and familial tensions intersect. The Reiner's tragedy, viewed through this lens, becomes not only a story of individual actions, but also a cautionary tale about the volatility of human relationships. The reconstructed timeline also informs the investigation into potential warning signs. Friends and colleagues who witnessed the argument at the party, combined with historical patterns of familial tension, provide critical context. The sequencing of events demonstrates that while the attack may have appeared sudden, it was the culmination of hours, interactions, and emotional build-up, an eruption that, in retrospect, contained elements that could have predicted the danger. As we proceed to explore the central figure in this timeline, Nick Reiner, whose presence and interactions appear pivotal, we begin to understand how individual agency intersects with family dynamics to produce outcomes that are tragic and irreversible. The reconstructed hours offer both clarity and mystery, revealing the framework of the night while leaving open the profound questions of motive, intent, and human behavior. Every detail in this timeline is a piece of a larger puzzle. From the laughter and tension at the party to the silent, terrifying moments inside the home, the sequence of events demonstrates the delicate balance between normalcy and catastrophe. For investigators, for family members, and for the public, understanding this progression is essential. It is the roadmap of tragedy, the skeletal structure upon which the narrative of horror is built. And yet, even with this timeline in hand, one critical truth remains. The emotional, psychological, and relational forces behind the tragedy are complex, layered, and far from fully understood. The events of that night were not inevitable, but they were the result of a convergence of moments, choices, and human imperfection. And what comes next? The focus on the son at the center of the story, the one whose actions are under scrutiny, will reveal the most troubling and perhaps the most shocking dimension of this family's tragedy. But what would unfold in the hours following the timeline's final moment? The involvement of Nick and the unraveling of the family's private world would leave everyone questioning everything they thought they knew. In every tragedy, there is often a figure who becomes the focal point, a person whose actions, choices, or presence loom over the narrative. In the case of Rob and Michelle Reiner, that figure is their son, Nick Reiner. His role in the events leading up to that fateful Sunday morning, combined with the explosive confrontation at Conan O'Brien's holiday party, has made him the center of public attention, speculation, and scrutiny. Understanding Nick, his personality, his relationship with his parents, and the tensions that had been building for years, is essential to grasping the complexity and tragedy of this story. Nick grew up in a household that balanced privilege with expectation. As the child of two prominent figures in Hollywood, he experienced the benefits of fame, access, and opportunity. He also faced pressures that many children could scarcely imagine: the weight of public perception, the demand to uphold family reputation, and the constant scrutiny of a world eager to dissect his every move. Friends describe him as intelligent and sensitive, yet at times volatile, navigating a world in which the stakes felt impossibly high. The dynamic between Nick and his parents was complex, layered with both deep love and mounting frustration. Throughout his upbringing, Nick's parents sought to provide guidance, structure, and support, yet their approach was not without tension. Rob, passionate and occasionally stubborn, often engaged in debates that could escalate in intensity, especially when discussing personal responsibility, family decisions, or life choices. Michelle, protective and assertive, would challenge him in ways designed to encourage reflection and growth, but that sometimes fueled resentment. Over time, these interactions, while rooted in love, created a psychological landscape in which emotional triggers could ignite rapidly. By the time of the holiday party, observers noted that tensions between Nick and his parents had reached a critical point. The argument at Conan O'Brien's home, brief but intense, was reportedly rooted in long-standing frustrations, disagreements about life choices, and perhaps unspoken grievances that had been accumulating for years. While outsiders could only speculate, friends present at the party later described the exchange as unusually sharp, the tone heightened, the energy charged with emotion. Even a single confrontation in a public setting can reverberate, leaving impressions that influence subsequent interactions, and, in this case, the reverberations were fatal. Nick's actions in the hours following the party are central to understanding the unfolding tragedy. While initial reports are careful not to assign motive prematurely, law enforcement's early focus on him reflects both proximity and potential involvement. The home's security features, the absence of forced entry, and the specific nature of the injuries all point to someone intimately familiar with the household and its routines. These details, when combined with the timing of the argument and his presence in the house, create a compelling, if disturbing, narrative link. To those who knew the family personally, Nick's behavior was at times enigmatic. He was described as loving yet unpredictable, intelligent yet prone to emotional outbursts, sensitive yet resistant to guidance. In many ways, these traits are emblematic of the challenges faced by children raised in high-profile households. A constant negotiation between autonomy and expectation, between individuality and familial obligation. The events of that weekend, however, highlight how even minor friction, when layered with years of unresolved tension, can escalate into catastrophic consequences. Experts in family dynamics emphasize that the parent-child relationship is one of the most psychologically charged in human experience. Emotions run deep, bonds are intense, and conflicts are magnified by love, expectation, and shared history. In the Reiner household, the intersection of high emotion and unresolved grievances created a volatile environment. While many families experience arguments, disputes, and occasional anger. The Reiner's case illustrates how emotional pressure, proximity, and personal history can converge in ways that produce tragic outcomes. Public perception of Nick is now shaped by both speculation and emerging evidence. Social media, celebrity reporting, and news coverage have scrutinized his every move, amplifying the emotional stakes for both him and his family. This external attention adds another layer of complexity. While investigations focus on objective evidence, the court of public opinion operates on narrative, rumor, and assumption. For Nick, this dual scrutiny, from law enforcement and the public, has intensified the personal and psychological impact of an already tragic situation. Analyzing Nick's potential motivations is fraught with complexity. Investigators must consider emotional triggers, the argument at the party, and the history of familial tension, all without relying solely on speculation. For psychologists, this involves examining patterns of behavior, responses to stress, and the interplay between long-standing grievances and immediate provocations. It is in this space, between evidence, psychology, and personal history, that the tragedy can be understood, though never fully justified or excused. The narrative surrounding Nick also raises questions about warning signs, conflict escalation, and family intervention. Could the events have been prevented? Were there moments where dialogue, mediation, or outside support might have altered the trajectory? Retrospective analysis suggests that multiple opportunities existed to de-escalate tension, yet the combination of personality, history, and circumstance rendered these moments ineffective. The tragic outcome demonstrates the fragility of human relationships and the catastrophic potential when unresolved conflict meets opportunity and emotion. Furthermore, Nick's proximity to both the victims and the scene of the crime places him under intense investigative scrutiny. Law enforcement seeks to understand not only his whereabouts and actions during the critical hours, but also the psychological and relational dynamics that might have contributed to the incident. Interviews, forensic evidence, and witness statements will all play a role in establishing a comprehensive understanding of the events, though even with this information, some aspects of human behavior remain unpredictable.